Hello, everybody. Welcome to IST 140. I'm, of course, Professor S. This is today's lecture. Let's get into it. Anyway, so let's kind of talk about loops, and we're going to kind of talk about the meat of the module in this lecture. So far what we've done is we talked about branches, right? That's what the if statements where we have like, where Java in this case is very procedural, right? So we have this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing, right? So line, 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 line. But then we have the branches, which like either injects lines into it or we skip lines or things like that, right? That's what branching does. What loops do is repeats steps. So it says like oftentimes repeat stuff. And there's two different ways that we could repeat stuff or like determine how many times we do it, right? So one way is that we do it until a condition is no longer true. And we have two ways of doing that. And then one is repeating for a certain amount of times. And we have only one way to do that. We're going to talk about the first one right now. That's the while loop. This is like the most common, kind of the easiest one. And you could actually use the while loop for the other ones too. But the other ones kind of make things easier. Hopefully you'll see why. The idea is like while loop works very similar to an if statement. The idea is like it checks if the condition is true and then does the statements in the block, right? The difference between the if statement and the while loop is that it keeps doing those statements until that condition is no longer true, right? So here we like have a flow chart for it. So we have the condition, and let's say it's true, then it's going to do some statements, right? The block of statements. And then after it finishes those statements, it checks to see if the condition is still true. And if it is, it continues to do those statements. And then if it's false, it moves on. And that's it. Okay. But the important thing is that it checks the condition before it continues doing the statements every time. Okay. Now, before we get into the next one, we kind of introduce a kind of a new kind of type of variable. So we have like index values that we've been using for the strings, right? So we know like where the characters are in the string. Those are indices. But we also like there's other times that we use indices. One of those is when we're thinking about iterations. And so when we're talking about iterations, we're talking about how many times to kind of do things. And we're like an iteration is a time that it's done, it's a situation. And so in the for loop, we're going to be using specifically a index variable to kind of keep track of those iterations. Now, one of the things that's going to be different than those iterations or those index variables than other things is that index variables we're allowed to do a single character value, right? So remember how before when we're talking about variables, I said no single character variables. With indices, it's kind of easier if you do a single character because it's just thinking about the location. Okay, let me give you an example, or let me just talk about the for loop with an example. So the way that the for loop works is that you start with you have for, and then there's three parts to it. Okay, the initialization, sorry, I can't talk, the condition, and the update. And the idea is like the initialization, that's where you're establishing the index variable's initial value, that's the name. And then the condition is like the condition for that index variable for how it repeats. And then the update is how that index variable is updated. Right. And so for the for loops for Java, it seems like it's kind of complex for a for loop for a language, but in being being this way allows it to be a little bit more flexible than other for loops. So like, let me give you an example. The one on the right, we have for, and then the first part is int I equals 0. So the I is the index variable, and we're just creating it in that location. It's totally cool to create a index variable in that location. In fact, it's kind of easier if you do. So when you're doing a for loop, declare and initialize it in that first step. So int I equals 0. It doesn't have to be I. It could be like, you could I don't know, you could use the word end, you could use J, A, N, anything you want, right? I recommend a single character because it kind of makes it easier to keep track of. And then the next part is the condition, right? So while I is less than or equal to 5, then you do those statements, right? So that's the condition it's checking. And then the last part is once it finishes that iteration, what does it do? And in this case, we add 1 to I and store it to it, right? So remember, that's what I++ is. It means I equals I plus 1, okay? Anyways, let's kind of go over what's going on in this code for this for loop, right? So it says it creates that variable I equals 0, and then it checks that condition, and then we add 1. And then, all right, so anyways, at first we create that variable, and we establish that it is a int, and that its first value is 0, right? And then it checks that value. Is that less than 5? And then it prints hello there, and then it will add 1 to I and store it to it, and then it'll go back and check to see if that's true. And then as soon as it's no longer true, it moves on, right? And if that initially starts off at being not true, it'll skip the printing altogether, right? So let's kind of go, one of the ways that we can kind of figure out what's going on is keeping a table to kind of keep track of each iteration. So here I'll do a demonstration with that, kind of showing you both how this for loop would work in this instance, and then also how we can keep track of it simultaneously. So I have here a little table here. So we're like the left column is the value of I, and the right column is the output. Okay. So each row of this table is going to be a different iteration. So we first start off with I being 0, right? So that's the value of I. And when it's 0, notice that it checks to see, is that less than or equal to 5? Well, 0 is less than or equal to 5. So then it moves on and it prints hello there, right? And then what it does is it adds 1 to I and stores it as I. So now the new value of I is 1. And it goes and it checks the value of I. It notices that 1 is less than or equal to 5. So that condition is true. So it moves down to print hello there, right? And then there's the hello there. And then it adds 1 to I. And so that's our new value of I. And it checks to see, is that less than or equal to 5? 2 is. So then it does another printing of hello there. And then it adds another 1 to I. And so our new value is 3. And so it checks to see, is that less than or equal to 5? 3 is less than or equal to 5. So it prints the hello there. And then it adds another 1 to I. So now it's 4, so which is still less than or equal to 5. So it prints a hello there. There it is. And then it adds a 1 to I. So now it's 5. 5 is less than or equal to 5. So it does a hello there. And it adds 1 to I. And then notice this. The new value of I is 6, right? And so then it stores that, it checks to see, is I less than 6, or is I less than or equal to 5? 6 is not. So then it moves on and it's done, right? So then what we can see is the how many times did it print hello there? And so I see, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 hello there's, okay? So that's one way that we can kind of keep track. This method is called tracing. And just doing a table for each iteration, the value of I. See, the thing is that these for loops can get much more intense. And yeah, there we go. That's a for loop. A lot of these loops are like kind of easy to like kind of initially understand, but like the mastering takes practice. Okay. We're starting to get into things that could be classified as algorithms and data structures. And that's like the meat of the difficulty of programming. Anyways, next loop is a do while loop. So this is very similar to the while loop, but notice it does the statements and then it checks the condition. So let's see the flow chart. So does the statements, then it checks the condition. And so whatever statements you have in there, it does them first, and then it checks the condition. And if it's true, then it repeats. And if it's false, it moves on. Okay. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Now let's kind of talk about, like, kind of compare the while and the do, because they're very similar, right? They're both like checking for a condition and then doing those statements that many times. So the one on the left is the while loop. The one on the right is the do loop, right? Or the do while loop. And notice they kind of look similar, but they're also very different. We have the condition before the statements, that's the while loop, and the condition after the statements, that's the do or the do while loop. So when would we want the while instead of the do? When would we want the do instead of the while? Okay. So if we want the statements to go, like, do one iteration no matter what, that's when we want the do loop, right? If we want the statements to maybe not run, then we do the while loop, okay? Anyways, let's go see these loops in action in IntelliJ. Here I am in IntelliJ. I created a new public class and I called it loop intro. If you created, remember, if you created a public class, don't change it to match mine. If you're going to create a public class, make sure you name it, like, you don't change this value right here. When you create a new one, here, I'll just show you. When you create a new one, that's when you type that in. Don't change the public class in IntelliJ specifically. Like, don't change, if it's main, like this, don't change it or it has a problem. All right, so just keep it however it is when you're doing IntelliJ. If you want it to be match mine, just create a new one. So just new Java class, and then to whatever you want it to call it. All right, so anyways, I want to do a main method, so public all right, and here what we're going to do first, let's do the for loop. So I want this to run 5 times, all right? So for, I like I being my first index, 0. And then while I is less than 5, let's see if this will do it 5 times. You might be able to do the math in your head. I just try to test it and figure it out from there. All right, so anyways, I is less than 0. So actually, we could just do it. So 0 is less than 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 5 times. So it does do it. So anyways, system out print ln. This is iteration. This is in the for loop. Iteration number, and then plus I. So I'm going to actually use the index variable in my statements. You don't have to in the for loop. You could just, like, every iteration the I increases, and notice that it's increasing by 1. But I just want to include it for this one. So anyways, let's run this and we'll see it 5 times. And it'll tell us what the values of I are. Right? And so as I said, like I counted before, remember 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So, and I know that's confusing, like 0 is the 1 and 2, so on and so forth. So actually, can we make it so that the first, where it starts at 1? Yeah, so let's start at 1. And since we're increasing by 1, let's make this 6, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6. It doesn't go 6 because 6, when I gets to 6, 6 is not less than 6, so it moves on, right? So here we go. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we could still do it for 5 times, and it doesn't have to start at 1 or 6. Like it could be like 23, and we could use something else like equals less than. And we don't want it to be 6. It'd be 23. So it'd be 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. And so we want it to be less than or equal to that value. So we're going to say 27, right? And so then let's run this. And so 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. There we go. And oh, we can also do the subtract. So it's going down, right, by 1. And so we could do I is less than or equal to, well, I mean, look what happens if I leave it as less than or equal to 27. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Here, I'm going to stop it here. Because the idea is it doesn't stop because it's always going to be less than or equal to 27. So one of the things that we got to watch out for when we're doing these loops is infinite loops. It's going to be kind of good that you test things out before you just go. But anyways, let's kind of, so we want to do minus minus, and we want to do 5. So it starts at 23. So 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, right? So less than or equal to 19. And it's actually not less than or equal to, because if we run this now, notice that it just skips it, right? Because the idea is 20, the first iteration is 23, and is 23 less than or equal to 19? Nope. So it moves on, right? So it just straight out skips it. And so we don't want to do less than or equal to. We want to do greater than or equal to 19. And there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wonderful, right? All right. So let me do this. I'm going to comment this out for a second. I want, there we go. All right. So anyways, the next thing I want to do is a while loop. We still want to do this for 5 times. So we'll do while, actually we'll do int. We're still doing an index, so keeping track of the iteration. So I'm going to do I equals 0. And we'll do while I is, what was it, less than 5 before? And we'll do, like, kind of copy this line here. But instead of for loop, this is a while loop, iteration number, and it'll print the I. Okay, so let's kind of run this and see what happens. Whoa, notice it's still going. Like, we still have this red square up here, so it's still going. I'm going to stop it right here. So it's doing an infinite loop. Why is that? So the idea is if you look, we have I is 0, and then it checks. Is I less than 5? 0 is, right? So then it prints the statement. And then remember, after it finishes all the statements in the block, it goes back and it checks, is I less than 0 or less than 5? It didn't change, it's still 0, so it keeps repeating that. We also know that it's not changing because look, the iteration is 0, right? So what we have to do is keep updating this. So we'll do I plus plus, right? And so then what it'll do is after it prints this, it does I plus plus. And it does the same thing it did in the for loop. So why do we need a for loop instead of a while loop? Look how many things that we have to keep track of. Like, this is like we create the variable, we have the condition, and then we have the update that we have to keep track of. We're able to do all of that in the parentheses in the for loop. Okay. So that's like, if we're doing a certain amount of iterations, then we definitely want the for loop. Okay. Let's look at what the while loop is like. So or the do while loop or the do loop. So we'll do, and we'll actually, I'm going to start having the I, I'm going to change that to 0. Again, I notice I don't need to initiate because I've already initiated here, and I'm just going to keep this running. And then I want to do this, and then we'll call this the do loop iteration. It'll still print out I. Actually, let's change it. Let's do, oops. Let's change this to j. So int j is equal to 0. And we need to make sure we update this because we're printing the I. So we do I plus plus, right? And so we need to do while j is less than or equal to, or we'll keep it the same, less than 5. Do this, and then we have the semicolon after it. Okay, so notice what happens when we run this. Whoa, 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 whoa. Notice it kept doing the do loop and it kept increasing the size. So maybe you saw this because I was, I tried to adjust the I first, but the idea is it's like we created the J and we're testing the J. And so it was doing the same thing that it was doing with the while loop because it's increasing I, but I has no bearing on this loop, right? It's just J. So instead of J that we should be instead of I updating I, we want to update J because that's the condition that we're keeping for this loop. And also we want to print this value here, right? So here so inside the loop, we could still refer to that I because we did, but as far as like what we're trying to do, we're trying to print the statement 5 times, right? So we need to we need to refer to J instead of I. It doesn't make sense to refer to I, right? So anyways, we run this and notice that it runs the while loop iteration number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this is the do loop iteration 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's referring to the J that time. Okay. Anyways, there's other things that we can do with the do while loop other than try to mimic the for loop. Another thing, you know what we could do is like the example that I had in class is that we had the user type in 5 to end the loop. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of this for now. We'll come back to this in a little bit. And I know I could just comment it out, but what I want to do is I'm going to use the scanner. So I need to import the scanner. Import Java util scanner. And I want to do the while loop. So I'm going to do, this is an index. This is a user number. So we'll be descriptive about this. User num equals, oh shoot, I need a scanner object. I'm just getting all ahead of myself. Scanner in equals new scanner. There we go. And we want int usernum equals in.next int, because that's what we're running. That's what we're trying to do is get the user, we're entering the usernum, and that's what we're going to be using. And while we want to continue doing this until the user number is 5, right? So if we do usernum is 5, actually we should prompt the user. So we do system out print, give the user some directions, right? End the loop now by, or end the while loop by entering in 5. And I want this to be on the same line. So it's print, awesome. And then I'll read after this, I'll read whatever the user has and store it as user num. And then while it is 5, I want it, or while it's, until it's 5, I want to keep on running this. And so I want to just keep reading whatever the user enters. And that's how we're doing this, this loop, right? So anyways, wait a second. Why is that a squiggly line? Do you know? It's because the thing is like with equals, we either are asking Java, is it equal, or telling it that it's equal, right? When we're telling it that it's equal, when we're assigning that value, that's when we use 1 equals. When we are asking it, when we're using it as a condition, when we're saying, are these the same, and that value is either true or false, that's when we use the double equals, right? And so since we're comparing, we want to use the double equals because we're asking, is the usernum equal to 5? And so then we want it to keep on, if it is, we want to keep on going, right? Well, actually, wait, we want it to run, when we enter in 5, we want it to end, right? Because that's what the loop says, end while loop by entering in 5. So if I press in 4, it should keep on going, but it doesn't. If I enter in 5, it keeps on going. So it's doing the opposite of what I want. You probably see why. And it's because this is, and you're yelling at the screen. I can't hear you. The thing is that remember this loop, it does this while this condition is true, right? So when it's 5, when I enter in 5 from the beginning, it equals 5, right? Excuse me, sorry. So if we do the exclamation point equals, so doesn't equal 5. So we do this loop while it doesn't equal 5, right? So let's run this and see how this works. So in this okay, so if I hit 4, okay, 3, 2, okay, 4, so it'll keep on going, right? But if I hit 5, it's done, right? And so even at the beginning, if I do it once, it's done, okay? Now, pause the video right now and see if you can do this same thing in the do loop, okay? So that it only asks the amount of times that you need. It doesn't add an excessive amount of iterations, okay? Go. Or pause and then, okay. I'm going to assume that you paused it and that you tried it. Let's kind of try it ourselves. So the idea is like we want this to, it's going to ask us the first time, and if we have 5 from the beginning, it ends it. Otherwise, it keeps on going, right? So I'm going to just copy this here. And I'm going to do, remember we're still using this while loop. I'm going to cut this while loop and I'm going to put it here with a semicolon. So we have the while loop and we want to do at the beginning, right? So it does this, end the do loop by entering in 5, right? And then it reads that number, okay? Let's give this a try. So anyways, so we run it. And so now it's in the while loop. So no, it's not the do loop yet because it's still on here. I didn't get rid of it. So I'm going to say 4. It still runs. So I'm going to do 5. We move on. Notice it's no longer the while loop. It's the do loop, right? So end the do loop by entering in 5. So if I do 4, it still goes. 6, not 5. 5, then it's over, right? So notice with the while loop, in order to do the same thing that we did with this do loop in the while loop, we had to do that, what we had in the statements of the while loop before our while loop. And so the do loop's able to condense it, so it makes it easier, right? So the idea is like, even though the while loop can do everything, the do loop and the for loop definitely have a place because it kind of condenses things and therefore makes it kind of easier to follow, okay? Now, the thing is, it's like being new to this, there's a lot to kind of learn to follow along. So just make sure you do the zyBooks. We're going to end the walkthrough here, by the way. But make sure you work on the zyBooks, and we'll talk more about this. I'll do a walkthrough in class tomorrow again. And then by the end of the week, we'll go into some nested loops. Okay? Something to look forward to. Anyways, yeah, thank you. Anyways, I think that's good for today. See you all later. Bye. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please press the like button below. It lets me know I'm doing something right. If you have any questions about any of the content, please send a message to both me and the rest of the teaching team in Canvas, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Don't send it through normal email, you will not get as fast response. If you have any suggestions for how I can make these videos better, please leave in the comments below. Don't forget to roundhouse kick the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified for the next video. Anyways, I think that's good for now. See y'all later. Bye.